Now that Midnight Season 1 has been out for quite a few months, I have run many hundreds of Mythic Plus dungeons. Along the way, I've been able to use a huge number of strategies which save loads of time per key. Today, I wanted to compile what I think are the most useful, but not always the most well-known, pieces of dungeon tech in the current Mythic Plus season. This ranges from general tips of how to handle certain deadly mechanics, all the way up to really niche and counterintuitive strategies that can only really be labelled as clever use of game mechanics. So let's start out with Skyreach. On the first boss, you can line of sight the wind knockback on the corner of the gate. The boss needs to be tanked about here in the center of the gate to allow both sides of the gate to work. You can also have two people LOS on the same corner, so you can both stand on top of one another. During the intermission, the rotating winds will also always go in the same direction. I'll put a little graphic on screen to illustrate this. For the construct mobs, the beam can be completely negated with Shadow Meld, or from these abilities that are used by specific classes. On the second boss, a player can jiggle in and out of the beam to partially immune the damage from it. This is normally done by a class that can do their entire rotation and move at the same time, so not losing any damage. Things like an Evoker or most melee classes can achieve this. The tank can also soak the last half of one of the beams. They just have to wait for the two tank frontals to go out after the beams start. On the bird boss, the fire circle that is dropped by the Phoenix mobs does no damage, so you don't have to worry about getting out of it once it's dead. The next one will likely be fixed, but I think it's kind of cool while it exists. The tank can position themselves on one of these spikes. Because the bird will spawn underneath the tank, if the tank does this at the moment, the bird will simply fall off the map and you don't have to deal with it at all. For the final boss, you can do a lot more damage by ignoring the ad when certain classes get the ability targeted on them. Evokers can give a Wurnstone to another player, so this allows themselves and that one other player to fully immune that mechanic. Other classes like Demon Hunters can use their dash once they get dropped off the edge. Hunters can disengage. Shamans can use Rush of Wind. Be careful with this. Some abilities which you think might work don't work. Moving on to Algethar Academy. On the first big pull, give your tank a lot of time to gather. If you want to have a metric of when you can actually start hitting the mobs, if you wait for the first lot of swirlies to come out and finish, that is generally then safe to start attacking things. The circles that are dropped on the first boss can be stood in until a second one drops. So I actually like to count this out myself. I will verbalize 1, 2, move, 3, 4, move. So this keeps everything nice and clustered. On the big ad after the first boss, it is a big uptime increase, particularly for melee, to actually eat the wind knockback with a defensive. Just make sure that you're positioned in a way that the knockback will throw you against one of the 4 pillars. In the section of the dungeon before Veximus, the worm's charges can be baited by the tank. To achieve this, you need the entire party to stack directly underneath the worm. Tanks should be careful on this with pulls that have lots of battle axes, since the damage intake there can be very, very high. On Veximus, do not take the puddles to Africa. Cluster them just behind the boss, and then tanks can slightly move the boss to give you more space to do the next round. The goop will disappear, and this will help both with your healer keeping everyone alive, as well as allow melee DPS to maintain uptime for as long as possible. In the final section, you can save a lot of time by pulling 4 smashes with Lust at the end. This is a very hard pull and requires a lot of coordination. The team will need to stack together to bait swirlies, move slightly, and then utilize defensives when the healer is outside of cooldowns. Don't try this in a random pug. It's very hard, but it will save a lot of time if you can pull it off. Our first one in Seat. I'm actually pretty proud of this one because our group cooked this up ourselves the other day. On the first pull of Seat, if you have a Paladin in the group, the Paladin can use Bop on the tank just before the barrier drops, which will allow them to gather all of the packs that they need without getting any of the bleeds from the champion charges. The only rule here is that the group needs to wait until the gather finishes, so like literally no damage at all should be done. The first boss will go a lot quicker if you ignore the ads. This does require a fair bit of movement and CC. Groups with a monk can use Ring of Peace on every single suck-in, which will stop the ads hitting the boss during this part of the fight. In the next section of the dungeon, hard CCing the Voidwalker mobs with something like Paralysis or a Hunter's Freezing Trap will prevent the pulsing damage that they cause to the party. The second boss, Bleed, will target one of the two players who haven't had it for the longest. I use an add-on called EX Wind to track this, but you can also monitor it natty. It's just a little bit harder. The reason you want to pay attention to this is that you can plan to utilize a defensive when the bleed overlaps with the group-wide damage from the slam. You can skip past these two mobs into the final area without a warlock as well. You can either do this by getting an evoker to rescue a two-seater mount up while having two other party members in those seats and then getting the last player to use a Wurnstone, or you can get one person to dash up onto the ledge, hop on a multi-seater mount, and then the other players run and jump into the seat of the mount like this and then hop out of the seat once they're up. On the first boss in Pit of Saron, the ticking movement impair debuff will come out in a predictable pattern. So it'll always start with two random players, and then it will pick the other two non-tank players for the next round, and then back to the original two. The reason this is good to know is that you can pre-defensive this, or you can immune it with something like Blessing of Freedom. On Ick and Crick, you should be using your extra dispels and movement immunes and decurses when a player is channeled by the beams from the extra ads, as it will stop the damage from coming out. The circle drops on the mini-boss also don't do any upfront damage, so you don't need to panic when things actually drop. When the boss raises its shield, it also has a 100% chance to be critically struck. So you should save your damage cooldowns if you can for the times where it raises its shield. For the first boss of Magisters Terrace, if you immediately pull the Pyromancer and the first boss at the same time, it will line up in such a way that the ignition cast from the Pyromancer will never overlap with the stomp from the boss, which makes it a fairly easy pull. The only thing to take note of is the first Orb Soak will also line up with an ignition, so you'll probably need a bigger defensive for this than you would for the later ones. If the tank takes the boss back to this exact position in front of the door for every Orb phase, only 4 will spawn. 2 on each side. There are crystals that are scattered throughout the dungeon, which can be used once by a player to give a short damage amp. This is normally reserved for DPS who are about to go into their cooldowns. The 2 easiest ones to grab are the ones in the corridor before the second boss, but there are a couple that are scattered in other spots. After the second boss, you should use a stun on this first pack before running down the corridor, as the random shredder dashes can actually kill someone if they get multiple around the same time. The final skip of the 2 big mobs before the last boss can also be done without a warlock, as long as you've got a handful of other classes present. Things like an evoker can rescue another player over and then get someone to Wurnstone to them, or other classes can use abilities like Gust of Wind, or Disengage, or Dash, or Grapple. You'll just need to pre-plan to make sure that everybody can get across if you're going to do this. If we're going left in Nexus Point, you should be tanking the Seers nowhere near the barrels that are in this area. If you tank the Seers near the inactive barrels, the lightning charge will hit the barrels and then cause them to activate, at which point you either have to swap to them and kill them quickly, or you will wipe. On the third boss, you should be holding the final charge until the boss starts casting this channel, so this will be the third charge, before standing in a line. This will completely avoid a round of beams spawning, which gives you more space, but also prevents you from getting cornered if you get unlucky with additional spawns. Spam clicking the altar before going down to the final boss will charge it up significantly faster than just channeling it normally. In the final section, unless your group is insanely well coordinated, never have more than one caster in any pool on this final platform. The dispel that comes out when these casts land is brutal and does lots of damage. On the Emberwing boss, it is good practice for the tank to take the boss to a side of the room. This will allow the melee DPS to keep uptime on the boss when they're targeted by the fire circle, but it also clusters most of the spawns on one side, which makes dodging during the intermission a little bit easier. The leap on the third boss will always go to the furthest player. So what you can do as the tank is the leap will go out to a DPS, and then if the tank takes a few steps back from the group, it will always bait to them for the second charge. The arrows on the last boss don't just exist to jump over the line, they also clear a ticking debuff. Players should deliberately stand on the arrows a second time after the boss casts the arrow rain ability. This fight will become nigh unhealable if the party doesn't clear their debuffs like this. On the duo boss in Maisara, the spear throw lady will leap in the direction of the tank. What the tank can do is position themselves with their back towards a wall to prevent this jump from going too far from where the bird boss is. Bats in the latter half of the dungeon are worth a lot of count. If you can grab some of them either out of the sky in the section going down towards the second boss, or from the sides of the bridges going up to the last boss, it is worth incorporating them into your route. On the second boss, a player can CC one of the fixate mobs with something like paralysis or freezing trap, and the tank can then pop the individual one that is active outside of the other two that are getting popped together. This will mitigate a large portion of the damage in this phase. The tank just needs to be careful and have a defensive running when they do this. And when going down for the intermission on the final boss, you want to try to CC the first mob as late as possible, ideally after your entire party has run past. This will give you a few more seconds of uptime for the damage amp. Let me know in the comments if you think there's some tech that I probably should have included in this video. This isn't an exhaustive list or anything. This is just a collection of the pieces of dungeon tech that I've used a lot throughout this season. Big thanks to my YouTube supporters, The Joy of Checks, Tobias, Yulem, and Is This Real at the Keystone Legend tier, as well as everyone else who supports me here, as well as over on Twitch. Much love to you all, gamers. Best of luck in the latter part of this season. Until next time, take care.